Hello and welcome to the Oregon Business Matters podcast, brought to you by Oregon Business and Industry, Oregon's statewide Chamber of Commerce. At Oregon Business Matters, we focus on insights, issues, and initiatives that impact Oregonians' shared prosperity and our state's economic health. I'm Angela Wilhelms, President and CEO of OBI, and your host here at Oregon Business Matters. And today I am here in Medford, and I'll be talking with two pillars of Oregon journalism. Patsy Smullin is owner and president of California Oregon Broadcasting, or KOBI, the parent company of KOBI TV in Medford. And with us is Bob Wise, president and general manager of KOBI TV, which is the NBC affiliate here. In taking the reins at KOBI, Patsy continued the tradition of her father, William Smullin, who established the KOBI TV in 1953. And last November, Patsy was honored as a, quote, giant of broadcasting and the electronic arts by the Library of American Broadcasting Foundation, a well-deserved honor for her. Bob has worked at KOBI TV for more than 20 years, and prior to that was vice president and general manager for KRCR TV in Reading, and I believe did some time on the East Coast, but we don't need to talk about that. So thank you, Patsy and Bob, both for taking time to talk with me today.
Thank you, Angela.
Great. Well, both of you have been in the broadcast business for a long time, though you got here in different ways and have different roles. Obviously, it's a little bit of a Venn diagram where your roles overlap, but I'd just like for each of you to talk briefly about your own careers. Let's start with you, Patsy.
Here I am.
So tell us a little bit about, the family business that you've carried on and your decision to stay with that and just your thoughts about journalism and your career and time in the industry.
Okay, and how long do you have?
Oh, well, let's start with a little introduction and we'll dive deeper.
Well, you're asking this at an interesting time because the reason I ran in here late was I was writing a speech that I'm giving in Klamath Falls tonight. And interesting that one of the things I was sharing in that was starting as a teenager in this industry, and that this is in Klamath, and I was sharing about how I started in cable TV, going door to door, trying to sell cable, which was endless reruns of I Love Lucy and not easy to sell. And also when I was calling on people who did have cable and weren't paying their bills, and one in particular, and I was a teenager, was picking up payment owed at a whorehouse in Klamath Falls.
Oh, gosh.
And it was my first introduction to such a thing and to meet the madam and understand the hierarchy. And I'm telling you this because there's nothing you don't get into when you're in communications, whether it's radio, newspaper, television, cable television, microwave, digital, whatever, it's still communications. And I didn't realize that I fell in love with it as a kid.
Yeah, well, that's great. So you weren't sort of forced into the family business. You really did fall in love with it as a kid. And
au contraire.
Oh.
One of my father's managers offered me a job when I was cruising through town really quickly, and there was snow and I had bald tires, and he said, come work for me for 2 weeks because my cable TV manager just walked off the job. And then apparently asked my dad, can I just hire her? And he said, absolutely not. I was the youngest of 5, and there were already too many Smullins apparently in the business. So he said no, and this particular manager did not tell me he said no. And that was some 50 years ago.
Well, yeah, that didn't turn out as planned for.
And so I got started doing that. I was only going to be 2 weeks, and really fell in love with it. And apparently either my father changed his mind, or I have no idea what happened between him and the person who hired me. But anyway, I'm still here.
You clearly showed you had a knack for it, so cooler heads prevailed. Bob, what about you? You've been a general manager in broadcast for about 30 years, if I'm not mistaken. So talk a little bit about your journey and how you got here and your role here at KOBI.
Well, and thank you for being here with us. Patsy and I have one thing that is so in common, that we love all media. I grew up in a newspaper family. My father worked for the Houston Chronicle, and it was not uncommon for all 4 of the kids, I have 3 siblings, to be required to read the Houston Post and the Houston Chronicle before dinner to be able to participate in the conversation that night. Things have changed a lot in journalism since then, but the fact of wanting to be a sports columnist was my calling. I really wanted to be a Blackie Sherritt or a Dan Jenkins or a John McClain, these people I idolized. And my father eventually pointed out, you're not a very good writer. So, but I loved media, went to work at a TV station right out of college, and here 43 years later, it's been my life, and I can't imagine doing anything else.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, we're certainly glad you're here. I've enjoyed working with both of you over the years.
By the way, I disagree with your father. I think you're a good writer.
Well, over time, maybe I have gotten a little better, but that's very kind of you to say.
Well, that's a good endorsement.
Indeed.
So you just alluded to this, and both of you mentioned this. Journalism is delivered in a number of different ways: radio, TV, cable, print, podcasts now, so on. And the industry as a whole has gone through a great deal of upheaval, really, it feels like in the past couple of decades in particular. Can you just talk generally about how the landscape has changed for regional broadcast journalism, and maybe more specifically about what you've experienced here in Southern Oregon?
Bob, you go first.
Sure. There has been a lot of change. I mean, the landscape here in Southern Oregon has had dramatic shifts in what media is still around. For example, the Mail Tribune went away. The Rogue Valley Times is trying to stay afloat. It's a tough world in that space. Patsy and I don't mean to speak for her, she is right here, but we are huge believers in newspapers and the importance of having a lot of journalism available. So much so that we agreed to buy a full-page ad in the first edition of the Rogue Valley Times welcoming them to Southern Oregon. That being said, more accountability is now put on us. I mean, we work really hard to provide now 5.5 hours of live local news Monday through Friday. Every day we're working to make sure it's a balanced newscast, that there's no editorial agenda. We are not in a journalism desert here in Southern Oregon, and we're not even on life support. There's really good journalism being done. Rural communities need us now more than ever, and it isn't only the journalism, it's for safety and things that we can provide that information that is so critical to our region. The beauty of what we get to do is this woman, and her being an independent owner allows us to move maybe quicker than these organizations that have so many layers to go through. But we're also a small business, right? And so we have financial difficulties that we face like any business. And we're doing all we can to survive and keep journalism in front of people and hopefully doing it the right way.
So for the first many decades in my profession, I dealt with independent owners all over the state of Oregon. Completely different world. And I dealt with completely independent owners all over the nation through the National Association of Broadcasters, all doing very similar work to what we were doing. And it wasn't that many years ago that in the state of Oregon, we were one of the few states left to have a lot of, again, independent owners. And would I say it was more fun then? Yes, definitely. Because you're meeting with people who often were the people that put these stations on the air, or these newspapers started them, or the radio stations started them. So it's a whole different pioneering atmosphere. And just in the last few years, that's all changed. We're now in the TV world as being locally owned.
Yeah, and to be clear, what you're saying is you are now the only TV network in Oregon that is locally, independently owned.
As far as I know, that's the case. And we experienced that transition in radio, and of course we started out in newspaper, and so we experienced it in newspaper and in cable television and all the communication industries. The changes have been very dramatic. Fortunately, I enjoy change, thank God. I don't know where I'd be if I didn't. I wouldn't be in the business, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, it is, it is interesting to think about the arc, and you mentioned doing this work in rural Oregon and a community like this, and I think back to, whether it's a natural disaster that the community has experienced, or the celebratory things, the large events that happen here, and the important role you play as, I don't mean storytellers in that subjective, editorialized way, but in sharing what's happening, and also sharing that really important information that makes it possible for those events to happen, for people to respond safely, to know what goes on. And I think, I don't know, I think it's very cool and such an important piece of the fabric. And I'm glad to hear you say that we're not in a desert in that sense down here, and just want to take the opportunity to thank you for what you do for the community.
Well, again, it is, I'll give you an example, the Alameda fire. It was an incredibly traumatic event here in Southern Oregon. Right before that fire, literally a few weeks before that fire, we changed our web content to be cloud-based. And I was so naive in that space, I didn't even know what that meant at the time. But during that fire, we have a camera on the Rogue Valley Manor. We were able to point that camera at that fire and put it on our website, compare the first responder audio from the calls that were happening to the various police, fire, those first responder comments that we had on that page, and we had over 4 million views that night. If we hadn't been on the cloud, we wouldn't have had that. But it was a unique way for us to provide safety, and the only way we knew how was trying to get information to our viewers. Patsy had arranged to have that camera up there, God only knows how many years ago, but those kinds of things are when local broadcasting is at its most important point. And that's why Patsy and now myself do as much lobbying for the interest of local broadcasting that we can. The other thing I'll touch on, Angela, is the access that we have here to political figures in Oregon is unlike any other state I've ever lived in. And the ability to have Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley, Congressman Bentz, all these individuals that are in our area come to our station all the time to have important conversations. We couldn't do that if we didn't have a local ownership that really cared about getting that information out and providing a platform for conversation to happen.
Yeah, well, I think it's also a testament. We met because I used to do communications staff work for one of those elected officials way back in the day, and I think it's a testament to you all that they want to come because they know they trust you, that you're going to give them a fair and honest, objective, fact-based opportunity to talk about the issues, and I think that's a testament to you all as well, that you have that access, in part because they want to be able to tell the story, but also in response to the fact that you treat that access with respect. And so, and that's been the case from the 20 years ago when I was on the other side of that equation. So,
and in turn, we expect that from them, and we do push them to be as honest and factual as is possible. And at a time like now, where so many people feel so, what would be the word? They just can't see how they can be of any benefit to the United States in terms of getting their views across, whatever side they're on. They are beginning to tell us right and left, okay, I still can make a difference in our community. And hopefully we're telling them, yes, you can, and you can use us to do so.
Yeah, no, that's right. You should expect that out of them. That's important. So both of you are involved in running a business. You talked about that, as the independent owner and the manager of the station. So you have that lens. And also, by virtue of being active members of the community, I am sure you talk to other business owners and operators in Southern Oregon. This region certainly has some advantages. It's beautiful. You have a great regional airport. It's fantastic. It's a place people want to be. There's some deeply rooted companies and also a culture of innovation. But I've got to think there are some challenges that you face as business owners and leaders as well. So it wouldn't be an OBI episode if I didn't at least ask one question about the sort of opportunities you see where you are and the challenges that you face as business owners and operators.
Well, you might be a bit of an exception in the fact that you really do know Southern Oregon and you know all the wonderful advantages that it does have, and it does. But there are also a whole lot of people up north that don't and don't think they need to, and who've never been here. And so we invite everybody in the state of Oregon to come enjoy Southern Oregon, and if you need a tour guide, we're happy to provide.
And that's true. I mean, I'm a Klamath Falls native, and if people up north have not been here, that is a shame, because it's their loss. They're missing out. So I'd also like to touch a little bit on philanthropy. And I know that's an important piece of your work and your lens. We talk a lot about how a healthy private sector is necessary, not just because of the jobs that it generates and creates, not just because of the tax revenue it puts into the state and local coffers for services, but also the third leg of that stool is philanthropy. And as we see businesses leave or close, we see sometimes disinvestment in community. As we see businesses grow, we see more investment in the community. And one thing I appreciate about a story that came out recently about unfortunately Dutch Bros leaving their headquarters for Arizona was the philanthropic focus that the founder still has in his local community. So all that is to say, Patsy, the success of your family's business allowed your parents to establish a foundation in 1990, and you carry on that work. Can you talk a little bit about the work of that foundation, and then can you both of you offer some thoughts generally about the important role that philanthropy plays in a community like this?
That's one of the reasons we love Southern Oregon and Northern California. Philanthropy is huge, and maybe that's part of that reason might be that Southern Oregon and Northern California have had to take care of themselves a little more. We aren't at the state capitol in 30 minutes. Lot of goals, a lot of missions, a lot of plans have to do with taking care of ourselves. And I have always been stunned at the philanthropy, both in the area I grew up in Northern California and here in Southern Oregon. And for me, it's just as much a part of business as anything else. In Bob's case, and I'll let him speak to that, the way that he does philanthropy all day, every day, via a television station. And in my case, wanting the television station to be a spokesperson for the community and its needs and wants, and in addition, personally giving back where needed in the communities that we live in. And I'm certainly not alone. I had chamber board this morning and was listening to various projects being done to help this community grow. I was devastated about Dutch Bros. I mean, I've known it was coming for a long time, and we, the governor says we're open for business, but are we? And not just us, but the entire state needs to truly work on that, because whether it's education for our kids or all the other needs we have, things are gloomy in a lot of ways, and we have to do something about it for the state of Oregon and wanting people to come and do business here.
Yeah.
And Bob, why don't you talk about how you make things happen?
Well, I think people are surprised our coverage area of where our signal goes. So we go north of Roseburg, over to the coast of Coos and Curry. We go east of Klamath into Lake County and into Northern California, as Patsy was mentioning. And part of what I like to do, and it really drives me, is addressing social issues that are happening in our region. So when I got here in 2004, shortly after that, we were fortunate to launch a project called the Southern Oregon Meth Project. For 9.5 years, we ran this program that was not about telling people not to do drugs. It was about having a conversation and learning from the people in our community of how to go into schools, how to have that conversation. And through that, in a partnership with United Way of Jackson County and their executive director, Deanne Everson, we have we've been able to create some pretty, I think, cool programs that are informative and hopefully help people maybe even get through a day. We currently have a program called Tomorrow Needs You, which is a suicide prevention mental health awareness effort. We have a leader in our region, Steve Rowe, who told his personal story of being bullied as a child and the impact that had on him. And he told that story to help others try to get through that tunnel. We have a campaign about opioids right now that we're working with Jackson County Health, Josephine County Prevention, Central Point Police Department to talk about and get information out about the impact opioids have on us. That is how a TV station can communicate change. We could not be more proud of it. Again, I couldn't do it if I didn't have an independent owner. When I was in Chico Redding, running stations that Patsy and her father used to own, when it sold in 2004, I was told you need to cut a lot of your staff, and these programs that you're doing for change, that's out the door. Well, Patsy said, welcome to Southern Oregon, and I've been here ever since, and she and I have been able to create some pretty cool things along the way.
Yeah, that's extraordinary, and a lot of people probably don't realize it or think about it because you're not doing it for the attention. You're doing it because it's what needs to be done as community members. And
we like to think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Well, and I love to watch when Bob works with the rest of the state in collaboration for these special social projects. He's worked with a lot of leaders in Portland who care about the state as a whole and have helped him greatly in making it not just a Medford, Oregon thing, but not only the state, but like on this suicide prevention across the nation.
Well, I've touched on, unfortunately, a couple of gloomy topics. I want to flip it as we come to a close here today. Despite the challenges and struggles, I can hear in both of you the enthusiasm you have for this work and for the station here and your coverage area. So before we leave, can you both of you just speak to something that makes you really optimistic about your work and community coverage, or just generally, something that you're really optimistic about as you come to work every day?
For me, it's the fact that when we call somebody, they take our call, and that they consider us worth the time and worth the thought. If we have a suggested project, that takes a long time just to get there, that they're willing to, you got an idea, you think it's important, I'm on my way over. Yeah. That is fantastic. And Bob certainly has opened a lot of doors in that regard. And the history of our trying to make sure that all our news stories cover issues that really matter to a community, to really affect their lives. Every time that happens, I'm excited. And again, the constant change, although difficult, is also exciting because we deal with different projects every day. My big one as of yesterday was we have a overrun of cats across the street in our warehouse. So you never know. Gosh. And I was working with one of our managers on that issue, and he said, no names here, but I used to work for a large broadcast corporation, and our bosses would never even have given me a time of day to talk about cats across the street. So you just never know.
You never know.
The opportunities that present themselves every day in an ever-changing world when you're working with a lot of journalists continues to be the coolest thing I could ever imagine. But then you top that with creative services, having to know about engineering, working with sales to develop partnerships and create those relationships that can hopefully help a business grow. I mean, every day we're given a lot of challenges because financially we're in a challenging environment. But the opportunity to grow our business is there every day. And we work really hard to be a good steward of our community, and that by providing good journalism or partnerships that can hopefully make a difference to the communities we serve. So, Patsy and I every day are met with a lot of smiling faces on our staff that are happy to kind of do the work that we are lucky enough to get to do. And we're always thrilled to have a visitor like you today, and I'm sure you were greeted with a big welcome when you arrived.
I was gratuitously nice sign on the TV screen, so thank you.
You bet. But as Patsy was saying, we can call people and they do answer. But the other thing is we answer. Neither one of us have a screener for our phone calls. If you have questions, concerns, comments, we welcome that. So don't hesitate to provide that. If you're listening to this and want to share a story or want us to be at something or whatever that might be, or don't like something we're doing, that's fine.
Angela, I just wanted to say thank you for staying in Oregon. Klamath Falls should be very proud of you and grateful to you for staying here and doing so much good work, both locally and nationally. And congratulations to a great career.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That's kind of you. I'm going to cut that part out and send it to my parents. Well, thank you so much. On that note, I guess I have the prerogative of ending it, but Patsy Smullin and Bob Wise from KOBI TV, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for what you do for your employees, for your community, for the state of Oregon. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. The Oregon Business Matters podcast is a production of Oregon Business and Industry, your statewide chamber of commerce. And our episodes can be found on all the top podcast platforms. For more information about OBI, visit OregonBusinessIndustry.com. Thank you very much.